60 Minutes, Rewind.
There was a time when the country of Zimbabwe represented the hopes and the aspirations of the entire African continent. It was rich in natural resources, it had democratic institutions, and blacks and whites lived together in relative prosperity. The credit went to Robert Mugabe, the only president Zimbabwe has ever had. He came to power 20 years ago after waging a successful guerrilla war against what was then the white-ruled former British colony of Rhodesia. With independence, he preached conciliation and convinced many whites to stay on and participate in a new democracy. But this past year, things have gone terribly wrong in Zimbabwe. For the first time, President Mugabe is facing tough political opposition, and he has reacted by declaring war on the whites he once courted and on thousands of blacks whose only crime has been to support the political party challenging him. What was once the most promising democracy in Africa is now on the verge of economic collapse and political anarchy. This is what's going on in the countryside today. These scenes were captured by a cameraman for British television. White-owned farms and their black farm workers' houses are being seized and destroyed in a government-sanctioned campaign of racial and political violence. 7 white farmers have been killed so far, and not even their dogs are being spared. In the past year, a major slice of the white population has packed up and left the country, and thousands of well-educated, middle-class blacks are doing the same thing. In the once prosperous capital of Harare, there are shortages of food and fuel, and in Parliament, a resolution has been introduced to impeach Robert Mugabe. When I arrived in the country this morning, the first newspaper I saw was this one.
Yes.
The latest public opinion survey says President Mugabe's popularity has declined so much that 74% of Zimbabweans want him to go. What is your reaction to this?
Nonsense, of course. Absolute nonsense.
President Mugabe calls it the politics of the moment, but the real question is whether Zimbabwe is still a democracy. At age 76, Mugabe is behaving like a man who is prepared to hold on to power at any cost. With the economy in a shambles and his political support slipping away, he is blaming the country's problems on less than 1% of the population. A few thousand white commercial farmers like Harry Milbank, who own 40% of the best land, employ 25% of the nation's workforce, and provide 40% of the nation's export earnings. Were you told at the time of independence that you were welcome here, that you were welcome to farm?
Yeah. Mugabe started off saying, we want you farmers to stay, you're an important part of the economy, the war is behind us, let's move forward together. I was born here, brought up here, went to school here. This is my country, I've got nowhere else to go to.
And most Zimbabweans agree he should stay. Last year, a new constitution that would have allowed the government to confiscate white farms without compensation and given Mugabe 10 more years in power was rejected by the voters. But Mugabe is carrying out the policy anyway. In the past year, more than 1,000 white farms have been illegally seized and occupied by a ragtag rural militia known as the war veterans.
They know that the farmer is the most racist of the white citizens in the country. And the white farmer has been the crudest of the whites in this country, the most backward in terms of the enlightenment and education.
I sit here and I listen to you describe these farmers.
Yes.
If you were white and you were referring to black people that way, most people would take those to be racist comments.
Well, how do you speak about racist or racial practices without condemning them?
They're all racist, do you think?
Majority of them, not all of them. There's some very good ones.
Mugabe says the war veterans are former soldiers in the war for independence who have become impatient and decided to take back the land that is theirs by birthright. But most of them are too young to have ever fought in the war, and it's widely recognized that their numbers are made up largely of jobless youths, officers from Central Intelligence, and paid volunteers for Mugabe's political party. They are led by Chenjerai Hunzi, a messianic physician who likes to be called by his nom de guerre, which is Hitler. He says anyone who resists the farm takeovers will end up 6 feet under. President Mugabe is his organization's official patron.
He has your support,
Yes, of course.
even though he likes to refer to himself as Hitler.
Of course. But what is in the name?
It isn't just the name. Martin Olds was one of the first white farmers to be murdered before the June election. His wife, Kathy, a polio victim, says war veterans backed up by Mugabe's North Korean-trained special forces surrounded the farm and ambushed her husband. He managed to hold them off for several hours with a hunting rifle and a shotgun, all the while calling for assistance on his radio.
They got into the yard, and the petrol from the vehicles in the workshop they used to make Molotov cocktails, which they then threw into the house. Martin's last stand was from our bath, where he'd filled it with water to get away from the heat. And obviously when things got too hot for him, he tried to make a run for it, and they shot him, mutilated his body, and then started pillaging the property.
The same week, another white farmer, David Stevens, who had risked his life by openly campaigning for Mugabe's opposition, was kidnapped by a gang of war veterans who seized his farm and hauled him off to the nearest town.
The mob brought David Stevens here to the police station in Mrewa. But instead of protecting him, the police stood around doing nothing, allowing his kidnappers to drag him off to a nearby cave where he was tied up, beaten, forced to drink diesel fuel, and shot twice in the face.
David stood up for what he thought was right. And that's what killed him.
Maria Stevens is his widow.
Was your husband armed that day?
No, David was never armed. We did not have weapons to have as for security.
And you think the police were part of this?
I don't think, I know.
Who do you hold responsible for this?
I am holding our president responsible for this.
Maria Stevens, wife of David Stevens, who was a farmer that was killed, reportedly forced to drink diesel fuel, shot twice in the face by war veterans. His wife says that you should be held personally accountable for his death.
Why? I wasn't there. I didn't give instructions to anyone.
What do you say to Mrs. Stevens? Are you sorry that her husband was killed?
We're sorry for any death that occurs, but they provoked the war veterans. They shouldn't have done it. They should have been more careful, and they can't lay the blame on us then.
President Mugabe told us that your husband provoked this violence, that he was responsible for his own death.
That is what Mugabe would like to believe, because it's his only way to get out of this.
The story will continue after this.
Amnesty International has called the violence state-sponsored terrorism, and it's not just white farmers who are being killed in Zimbabwe. Most of the victims of political violence have been black. In the past year, more than 30 members of the opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change, have been murdered, and thousands more have reported incidents of assault and intimidation. Adela Chiminya's husband was out campaigning when he was attacked by a crowd of Mugabe supporters near a service station.
He started beating him with the iron bars and some stones. Then they poured some petrol and burnt him.
They set fire to him after he became unconscious?
Yes.
Where were the police when this happened?
They were at a distance watching.
They could see it going on?
Yes.
These acts are being orchestrated from the top.
Paul Nyati is a member of parliament and a party spokesman for the MDC, which won nearly half of the seats contested in the past election. He's also a distinguished veteran from the War of Independence.
President Mugabe himself is on record as telling the nation of Zimbabwe that those that are opposed to his rule will be killed.
What do you think about what President Mugabe is doing with the white farmers?
It's absolutely horrendous. It's disgusting. If land is required, let that land be acquired legally. Unleashing unlawful war veterans to go and intimidate white farmers, beat them up, it's not what a president of a country does.
Nyathi says most previous attempts to resettle war veterans on good farmland have failed miserably, and that's according to the government's own studies. Most have neither the skills nor the resources to make a go of it. And 2 years ago, the government had to repossess 250 farms that had been given to war veterans. But the policy may be the only way Mugabe can hold on to the support he has left in the rural countryside, and he's not backing down. When we were talking in the fields with farmer Harry Milbank, a group of war veterans appeared on the horizon.
Can you just get hold of the police, say that they've come on? They're approaching us at the moment, and we'll see what they do.
Okay, so they've undone the gate?
Yeah, confirmed.
One of the farm workers told us that the war veterans were coming to break our cameras, and concerned that our presence was inflaming the situation, we retreated at Milbank's urging to a nearby ridge where we could record what was happening. After haranguing and trying to intimidate Milbank, the war veterans, aware of our presence, decided they would be better off talking to the cameras instead of breaking them. Their leader, Fanwell Chigwedere, told us he was just following orders.
We are not doing this on our own, but we are following the orders from the superior, that is from the government.
Mr. Milbank says that the legal process has not taken its course, that he has not been told to give up his land by the courts, and that he has a legal right to stay on it.
If he is going to argue with us, he is committing suicide.
What do you mean he's committing suicide?
Ms. Milbank is very stubborn, and we are going to take this farm whether he likes it or not. Don't put yourself into danger. If he misquotes us, then I know we have got your names and we'll get you. This will be the last time to come here for you.
The threats are not to be taken lightly. An average of 2 farmers a week are attacked with pickaxes, machetes, and whips. Ian Hardy was beaten and tortured within an inch of his life when he went to the Mugabe police station to try and rescue David Stevens. He doesn't expect anyone to be punished for it, in part because President Mugabe has granted a blanket pardon to anyone liable to criminal prosecution for politically motivated crimes, with the exception of murder. Just one more reason why Hardy and his wife Marjo want to leave.
You don't think it's safe here anymore?
No, definitely not.
Are you looking forward to getting out of the country?
I'm nervous, but I'm not prepared to take another chance of losing my husband. Because it could happen again, and the chances of it happening again is very high.
There are plenty of other reasons to leave. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have suspended all financial assistance, and the currency reserves are exhausted. Money from the current tobacco crop is already running low. There may not be a next one. The fuel crisis has brought hard times to the townships. These women told us bus fare is often more than their family salary. And Zimbabwe's game parks, the centerpiece of a once strong tourist industry, are empty. Some, like this one at Amiri, are occupied by war veterans.
What happens to the animals?
I'll try and look after them through thick and thin.
86-year-old Norman Travers worries that the rare black rhinos they breed here and the elephants they train will be poached and eaten.
Will you stay here?
Of course. This is my country. I love it.
Would you be happy to see all the white people leave Zimbabwe?
No, I've said so out of anger.
Would you be happy if they left?
If they left on their own accord, good. They would make land more available. Why not?